Good morning. So on behalf of EFSA and RIVM, I wish you all a warm welcome to this webinar. So my name is Bruno Dujardin. I'm a team leader in the Methodology and Scientific Support Unit at EFSA. And today I will be guiding you through this webinar. So today's webinar will dive into the topic of using the Open MCRA tool for prospective cumulative risk assessment of pesticide residues. So in the past years, EFSA already made a lot of progress in this area, especially regarding the implementation of retrospective cumulative risk assessment of pesticide residues, where we have assessed cumulative risks on the thyroid, the nervous system, and craniofacial malformations. And work is currently ongoing for a number of other organs. So while no major risks have been identified so far for those organs that we already assessed, there is clearly a demand from risk managers, but also from civil society at large, to also assess how new authorizations of pesticide products might impact on such risks. So this is what we call the prospective cumulative risk assessment, and this is also what we will look into today. The problem is that such cumulative risk assessments are complex and may also be considered as daunting by the community of stakeholders and risk assessors in the EU. And this is also why in EFSA, together with our colleagues at RIVM, we try to develop user-friendly applications that will facilitate the future implementations of such assessments in an efficient and transparent manner. So today, together with our colleagues at RIVM, we will present the progress made in the area so far, and we will also showcase the implementation of the prospective CRA methodology in MCRA. Now, before moving into the matter, I just would like to remind you of a few housekeeping rules. So first of all, you are now connected to the audio broadcast. This is a one-way audio in English. This means that you will only be able to listen, but you will not be able, but we from our side will not be able to hear you. This event is being recorded, and the recording will be published on EFSA's website in the coming days. During the event, you can ask questions in writing through the dedicated Q&A area on the right-hand side of your screen. These questions can be posted throughout the whole webinar and will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end. The most liked questions will be answered first, so please make sure to like the questions from other participants that you find relevant. Please be aware, however, that questions posted in the Q&A may be filtered out by our moderators in case they are outside the scope of this webinar or if they are already covered by questions previously submitted. Should this be the case, you will be notified by our moderators. After the event, attendees will receive a link to a survey to evaluate the event and services provided, and also the replies to the questions not answered during the live Q&A due to time constraints will be published on EFSA's website. Now, while I have the pleasure to chair this webinar, the hard work will actually be delivered by a few other colleagues. We will have three presenters. The first one will be my EFSA colleague, Angelo Caffaro, and he will then be followed by two presenters from RIVM, Jacob van Klaveren and Anne Zwaartsen. Furthermore, to moderate your questions, I will be supported by my colleagues Marloes Schepens from RIVM and Luc Moimont from EFSA. With this, I believe we are now all set to dive into the topic. So first, you will receive a presentation from Angelo, who will provide an overview on the cumulative risk assessment at EFSA. Jacob will then proceed by explaining how prospective cumulative risk assessment has been implemented in Open MCRA, and Anne will finish with a very nice demo of this tool. After those presentations, we will proceed with a Q&A session where we will reply to your questions. So without further ado, I will now pass the floor to my colleague, Angelo Caffaro.
Thanks, Bruno, for this nice introduction, and welcome everybody to this webinar. So in this first part, we will provide an overview of cumulative risk assessment of pesticide residues at EFSA. We will start with a background on how we get to this also webinar today. Then we will go into some more detail on the implementation of prospective CRA methodology. And then we conclude with a brief overview of our partnership with RIVM, discussing about Open MCRA. So the requirement to perform cumulative risk assessment of pesticides, CRA, from now on, was already included in the legislation in 2007 and was also anchored again in another piece of legislation in 2011, as you can see in the timeline in the slide. Since 2007, we started working on the methodological developments of CRA, and around 2014, we started executing some pilot assessments that I will describe you in a second. Then since 2019 to 2020, we have really moved towards what we call routine implementation and full implementation of CRA. And now, this slide, so I'll show you basically what we have done so far in terms of retrospective CRA in the pilot assessment. So first of all, in retrospective CRA, we look at the situation as it is currently. So we try to estimate risks associated to the foods that are currently on the market. And so for that, we look at monitoring data in the past years to have an estimation of those potential risks. The pilot assessments mentioned before were issued in 2019, and they were referring to two target organs, as you can see on the left top of the slides, the thyroid and the nervous system. So the thyroid as an example of chronic risks, and the nervous system as an example of acute risk. In terms of monitoring data, we were considering a 3-year cycle covering 30 commodities from the years 2014 to 2016. And we were also looking in 10 population groups, 4 adults, 3 for children, and 3 toddlers. Then you can see on the right part, in 2020, we issued a follow-up assessment, which was again looking at the nervous system, but this time looking at chronic effects. Finally, in 2022, we then issued another assessment on craniofacial malformation. And in this case, we used the most recent cycle of monitoring data available, of course, but on top of that, we were able to increase the number of commodities to 36 into the data considered. The number of population group was increased to 14 as the data was available. And in that case, we were only looking at the woman of childbearing age, because that's where such craniofacial malformation may occur during pregnancy. This was a very important step towards expanding the scope of those cumulative risk assessments. As you may notice in the previous slides, the time that was needed to develop CRA and to proceed with pilot assessment was quite long. So this is why, together with the European Commission in 2021, we issued an action plan on CRA. This plan was composed of 4 pillars. You can see on the top left of the slide, the first one, focusing on the development of new cumulative assessment groups, and where we also implemented a prioritization method. The purpose of this prioritization method was, on one hand, to reduce the number of substances and to look at substances that present the highest concern, and also to prioritize the organs that will be of highest relevance in terms of CRA. The second pillar is about retrospective CRA, and this is the type of assessment that they were executed in the pilot that I described earlier. The third pillar, you can see on the left part in the bottom, is about prospective CRA, and that differs, as Bruno mentioned, in the sense that we use the retrospective CRA as background information, but then we try to estimate how a new authorization of a pesticide might impact on those risks already estimated. This is a method that has been recently finalized, and the implementation in MCRA is under discussion. More details will come later also in the presentations from RIVM colleagues. Finally, the fourth and last pillar was referring to integration of non-dietary exposure into CRA. However, this still requires a lot of methodological developments and precise timelines have not yet been defined for this pillar. Now we go a little bit in more details into the CRA prioritization exercise. So as mentioned in the previous slide, the idea was to implement a prioritization method, which we initiated in 2021 and finally issued in 2023. The idea was to look back at monitoring data, again from a 3-year cycle in 36 commodities from the year 2019 to 2021. And then we performed the first preliminary analysis that you can see on the left side of the timeline, where we identified all substances with positive findings. And we retained 371 pesticides from that. These 371 pesticides were subject of a first screening of exposure, where we considered 30 different population groups in 17 countries, 15 for adults, 10 for children, and 5 for toddlers. Based on that substance screening, we identified pesticides which had a hazard quotient exceeding 0.1. Those substances were then considered as substances with highest potential risks, and they were retained for grouping at the level of an organ system. They were grouped in 16 different target organ systems, and for those 16 target organ systems, we again performed probabilistic assessments that allowed us, in this case, to retain the target organs with a hazard index exceeding 1. Overall, so at the end of this exercise, this allowed us to identify 67 pesticides and 5 target organs of high priority. This slide here shows the ongoing efforts in the cumulative assessment group that have been identified in performing the retrospective CRA. So we are proceeding with these organs of highest priority. The first one on top was already considered the priority before we're doing the pilots, and it was the thyroid, for which we performed then the assessments. Then we are repeating the assessments we already performed to see if the situation has changed. On top of that, we are also planning to do CRAs for effects on the liver, effects on the kidney, and effects on the reproductive toxicity, including fertility and also possible effects in terms of developmental toxicity and hematopoietic system toxicity. So for the first one, the thyroid, the risk characterization is already ongoing, so we are close to finalization. For the liver and kidney, the establishment of the cumulative assessment groups is almost final, and we will soon proceed with the exposure assessments. For the other groups, we are still at much an early stage, where we are at the step really of trying to identify specific effects. It is important to mention that all these CRAs and also in this prioritization exercise that I showed you before, the intention in the future is to repeat them on a 3-year basis. This is to make sure that on the medium long term, we ensure this continuous follow-up in terms of cumulative risks. This is, of course, a collaborative effort that we cannot do on our own in EFSA, and therefore we are collaborating with different national agencies at different levels. So one of the objectives is to build capacity around CRA within the different EU member states. In terms of executing exposure assessment, we collaborate with RIVM and Wageningen University in the Netherlands, ANSES in France, and DPI in Greece. For hazard assessments, so for the establishment of cumulative assessment groups, we are collaborating with the Austrian agency EGES. But also through the involvement of different experts, through the execution of different subtasks, we also collaborate a lot with German Institute for Risk Assessment, BFR, and with the Danish Technical University, as well as with different selected experts in working groups. So now we move to the second part of this presentation, where we go a little bit in more details into the prospective CRA methodology as we implemented and designed here at EFSA. So this is a brief timeline that, following the pilot assessment for the retrospective CRA issued in 2020, shows that in EFSA, in close collaboration with RIVM, European Commission, and member states, we initiated discussions on the elaboration of prospective scenario for dietary CRA of pesticides. Then this resulted in a first scientific report in 2021 that, supported by a number of case studies, already provided clear insights for a possible tiered approach in prospective CRA of pesticides. However, some parameters and uncertainties remained unclear and did not allow us to conclude a consolidated approach in 2022. Then, recently, EFSA, in collaboration with the French competent authority ANSES, elaborated two mock assessments which were published last year in 2024. These two assessments provided further insights on how to address uncertainties associated to prospective CRA. This allowed European Commission and Member States last February in 2025 to endorse the agreed scenarios for prospective CRA of pesticide residues in food. And while this is an important milestone, it should be noted that timelines are practical modalities for the implementation of such scenarios in daily risk assessments have not yet been agreed and will be further elaborated by European Commission and Member States. So in this slide, we provide an overview of the so-called tiered approach. The methodology that was endorsed for prospective CRA of pesticide residues will most likely be composed of 4 steps. On the left side, you can see that the first step is intended to verify whether the substance qualifies for some prerequisites. For example, does the active substance under assessment belong to a cumulative assessment group already established? The second step below refers to as tier 0. It is a deterministic approach where it is intended to understand whether exposure resulting from the new authorization MRL already exceeds a given threshold. If exposure from new authorization or MRL remains below the threshold, further assessment will not be required in such case. The third step is the tier 2. It is a full probabilistic CRA to be performed with MCRA. Depending on the outcome of this tier 2 assessment, an uncertainty analysis may also be required in step 4. Some important notes. So today in this webinar, we focus on tier 2 with MCRA. Also to keep in mind that EFSA is currently working on a cookbook for prospective CRA that will provide further instructions on the different steps to complete those assessments, on the different steps in general. Then prospective CRA is not intended to replace deterministic assessments with PRIMO on single substances, but should complement those assessments. So this means that the current requirement for single substances assessment, as indicated in the slides in the equations, will remain. The audience may also have noticed that tier 1 is missing on the left in the proposed methodology. This is because initially an intermediate tier 1 approach has been considered, but it was not proven to be effective and therefore removed from the proposed methodology. Now we go into the basic principles that are behind the calculations of probabilistic retrospective CRA, just to give you some an overview. So the tier 2 scenario for prospective CRA relies on the same probabilistic principles as the retrospective CRA. In a first instance, we look at the chemical monitoring data in food that we have available, which includes co-occurrence information for multiple pesticides adjusted with a potency factor. These monitoring data are then combined with the consumption data that we have in EFSA. This combination of data happens through what we call Monte Carlo simulations. They basically allow us to simulate exposure distributions. These exposure distributions that you can see on the right part of the slides allow us to look into the variability of exposure within the different population, to look at those higher percentiles of the exposure distribution to make sure that we protect the most exposed part of the population. Now, on top of this Monte Carlo simulation, we apply a two-dimensional bootstrap of those datasets, which allow us basically to recreate those datasets multiple times, let's say 100 times. And by repeating this process 100 times, we also obtain 100 estimates of those exposure distributions. Once we have those 100 estimates of those exposure distributions, we also have 100 estimates for each of the percentiles. And that basically allows us to calculate a confidence interval around the different percentile estimations. So through this methodology, we are able to simulate viability within a population, but also sampling uncertainty. All the estimates that we obtained from the probabilistic modeling, they are expressed in margin of exposure. The higher the margin of exposure, the lower the risk. So it's really important that this margin of exposure remains below the threshold of regulatory consideration. This is the tier 2, the final scenario that has been also endorsed, as I mentioned earlier. So as for the retrospective CRA, the prospective CRA relies on the use of pesticide monitoring data to account for the so-called background exposure to other pesticides. The main difference is that for this background exposure, monitoring samples that were not compliant with the MRLs have been removed. So the underlying principle is that new authorization should not be penalized by illegal uses of pesticides, as other mechanisms are in place to assess such illegal uses. Furthermore, to account for the exposure resulting from the new authorization, also referred to as foreground exposure, results from supervised residue trials compliant with good agricultural practice considered for MRL setting are integrated in the probabilistic exposure calculations, as you can see on the right part of the diagram. This also takes into account a default use frequency of 20% for this new authorization, but other use frequencies can be implemented where considered appropriate. Further details on the type 2 methodology for prospective CRA will be presented in the next intervention. Now we conclude this first presentation with this part where I will give you more details about how we implemented such cumulative risk assessments in the framework of the Open MCRA platform. So the MCRA tool can be used for the cumulative risk assessment of pesticides and comes from a need to have a common EU efficient, transparent, accessible, harmonized, and user-friendly software tool to support the calculation and the combined exposure to the assessment of combined exposure to multiple chemicals. In this overall timeline that you see on the slide, I described the partnership that we established between EFSA and RIVM for the development of Open MCRA. So it started, you can see on the left in the feasibility phase, with issuing a feasibility study in 2021 aimed at understanding if the desired objectives, harmonization, transparency, for instance, and interoperability, could be achieved with MCRA. Following then a positive outcome of this feasibility study, a framework partnership agreement was renewed in 2022, and we entered into what we called the development phase. That it's still ongoing, and where we are implementing retrospective and prospective CRA methodologies within MCRA. Then from mid-2026, we move at the end of the development phase into the operational phase. And in this phase, this is envisioned at this moment, where we move to the routine mode. MCRA will continue to be enhanced and maintained, and the tool will be operationally available for all interest stakeholders. Just to give you a little bit more details on what are the pillars of the development phase. So we are setting our work on transparency to make core models of MCRA open source and create a clear governance around the tool. On interoperability, to give possibility, for instance, within the tool to connect different sources of data to perform the probabilistic assessments, and as shown earlier. Accessibility, to provide access to a variety of user groups and to provide dedicated and simplified user interfaces, all together create an harmonized approach. I will give in a second the definition what we defined as standard regulatory actions, as well as building capacity and providing trainings. So standard regulatory actions provide regulators with a user-friendly option to perform CRA compliant with agreed methodologies. They are specified as 3 levels, as you can see from the slides. On top, the regulatory method, then the definitions, and finally the implementations. The first level refers to the use of an established official methodology for CRA, let's say the retrospective CRA. The second level of a standard regulatory actions is the level of the definition. So at this level, it is defined which data and setting for the regulatory method, let's say for retrospective CRA, are fixed and which can be freely chosen by the user. And then, according to this layered approach, the last layer is the implementation. This describes the implementation and application of a standard regulatory action definition in a specific software, for instance, MCRA. So given a method, as for example, retrospective CRA, we can provide a definition of the data and settings that define this methodology, those that are fixed and those that are open to possible changes. And then we implement those into a tool that is, for instance, MCRA. The final goal is to make the use of MCRA as user-friendly as possible for the stakeholders, while ensuring transparency on the complex models that are behind, as the complex to run the probabilistic assessments. This is a crucial aspect for efficient and successful implementation, ensuring also acceptance by all the different stakeholders. This briefly shows you where we are now. We focused on the first year, so our partnership on transparency and interoperability. We are still refining it, and we are working on completing accessibility and providing an overall harmonization and maintenance, as well as trainings to conclude the development phase. In this work that we are doing with RIVM, we had already several achievements, 2 reports that are issued every year, one focusing on the developments of the tool itself, and one focusing more on the scientific content and also how it is implemented in MCRA concerning the standard regulatory actions that are available. The core models of MCRA have been published in an openly accessible repository, and every year we release a new version that is accessible through the web app of MCRA. And relevant trainings for relevant EFSA networks, for DG Sante staff, for the working group on CRA, for scope of members, and this webinar today opening up for all interested stakeholders have been offered and organized. We are currently working now on performing the interoperability step. So the goal is that we want to continuously improve user friendliness by allowing users to simply select the data of interest for their assessments, namely food consumption data that we make available at EFSA. And we are also still implementing the latest endorsed methodology for prospective CRA into the standard regulatory action available in the tool that you will also see in a short demo also later in the presentation offered by RIVM. Finally, this is what we plan in the medium short term. So this webinar today is starting point, basically to start disseminating our activities. There will be more details in the 2 external scientific reports that will be published in July. One on the tool MCRA and one focusing on the standard actions available, as well as the release of the web version of MCRA. Then in the fall, by ensuring accessibility of Open MCRA and a sustainable financial model to operate the platform and maintaining it, we would like to renew EFSA RIVM partnership to transition to what we called the operational phase from 2026 and onwards. And then starting from next year, we will update CAGs when needed. We will start limiting the options for prospective CRA scenarios by clearly defining the definitions of the standard regulatory action layer in MCRA according to discussions at the level of Commission and agreed methodology. We start implementing the sensitivity analysis. This will be a complex and challenging task that we will tackle. And then we will further improve features in MCRA in the next terms. So this slide concludes my presentations, and I give back the floor to Bruno. Thank you.
Thank you, you, Angelo, for this presentation, which gave a clear overview of where we are now. With this, I think we can move to the next part, which will be presented by our colleagues from RIVM, really focusing more on the implementation in MCRA. So, Jakob, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Bruno and EFSA colleagues. And this is a little bit more into how it will be implemented in MCRA software. So maybe go to the next slide. And my name is Jakob van Klaveren. I'm a senior scientific advisor at RIVM, mainly focused on mixture risk assessment. But this presentation contains first a little bit of recap on cumulative risk assessment methodology, because that needs to be clarified on how to implement it and how it is implemented for retrospective cumulative risk assessment. And then we will focus on work in progress on prospective cumulative risk assessment methodology, also following endorsed methodology and the cookbook that still is under way. It comes with uncertainties, like any scientific implementation. It comes with uncertainties, and I will explain a little bit which uncertainties are now being discussed. Next slide. So a recap, first of all, like the basics of risk assessment is coming from hazard identification and characterization and exposure assessment, and then it comes to risk characterization. For mixture risk assessment or cumulative risk assessment, as it's stated in the pesticide regulation, it comes with a group of pesticides. So then for the group, you also have first to think which pesticides should go into a group and how is that be decided based on criteria. And then if a group is established, one pesticide is referred to be the index chemical, and the other pesticides do also have a toxicity which is in relation to the index chemical. Then you have to divide hazard of the index chemical by the exposure, which then become risk characterization. A more detailed next slide, please. On the grouping, EFSA published a guidance for scientific criteria for grouping. And if we all know, in toxicity, tests are done on the critical effect, but for the mixture effect, it could be the case that toxicological information is not that readily available and you have to dig more into the details. If details are there, you like to group on the adverse outcome of chemicals. If that's the similar adverse outcome or dissimilar adverse outcome, it can be grouped. But if that information is not available, you might still need to group on a common target organ, like we saw the liver, or as already done, the thyroid, etc. But the grouping is very important to understand, and where you can find the basic principle on that. So next slide. Based on the grouping, we see that three organs have been well addressed in retrospective cumulative risk assessment, as also explained by Angelo, but still 5 others are underway and will be done in the future. But for each active substance in a cumulative assessment, we need to understand the no effect level from the animal studies done for those chemicals, and we need to identify a relative potency factor so we can refer the pesticides in a group towards each other. Next slide. So then we come to exposure assessment, and here thanks to the general food law, every country, every member states have to send data on monitoring and consumption data to EFSA. These data are well harmonized in EFSA, and via the data connectivity in the partnership with EFSA, we connect that also to MCRA. So that comes with food consumption data for 16 countries at the moment, addressing 30 population. And the monitoring data as well. National food safety authorities do the monitoring based on legal obligations and send that data in a harmonized way to EFSA. So that's all in MCRA. Next slide. The relative potency factors comes with then, as explained, for example, there are 3 pesticides in an apple, a blue one, a purple one, or a yellow one, and they have different potencies. And the blue one is then the index compound, have a relative potency of 1, and the purple one has a potency of 0.5, which means it's twice less toxic than the blue one. And then we have the yellow one somewhere in the middle of the purple one and the blue one. And Apple 2 can then include other pesticides, but this is how you sum up the pesticides in an assessment group when you are doing the assessment. Next slide. It's based on the 3-year cycles of monitoring data, as also explained by Angelo, but then it comes to, you have a consumption database and a concentration database with all the data that you need for the assessment. You go into the consumption, the first person, and you go at the concentration database, at randomly take out the monitoring samples for all the pesticides in that group, and you sum them up, and you do that for the second person, the third person, until all the persons are done, and then you iterate again. And where the persons had good luck in the first draw, having low values, could have bad luck in the second draw. And in that way, you mimic all the possibilities in society by drawing as much as you can, 100,000 iteration, and you see all those combinations will then appear in your output distribution. Next slide. So that it's expressed in the total margin of exposure. For one pesticide, you will say a margin of exposure, but if we have a group of pesticides, we call it total margin of exposure, the MOOD. And then look at the 99.9 percentile as endorsed methodology by the European Commission as the threshold of regulatory concern. That mood should then be larger than 100, and then we say there is no regulatory concern for the whole cumulative assessment group in the retrospective assessment. Next slide. Now we come to prospective cumulative risk assessment, and we start to, it's still ongoing work depending on the cookbook of EFSA, but the concept is that you have retrospective done, you have background exposure based on the retrospective observations, and now a new MRL application comes into play. It means a new pesticide with a new food item needs to be considered on top of the background. This is what we call foreground exposure. Next slide. So then if the background is already filling up a risk up to a certain percent, let's say 60%, there is still room for a new one, new pesticides in that assessment group. But if the risk up is already filled up for 100%, risk managers should do something about it, or somebody should do something about to make the risk up a little bit less full. Next slide. So start with the deterministic approach, as also explained by Angelo. This is tier 0 or something you have to do for the single chemicals. If that margin of exposure is below 100, there is a health risk cannot be excluded based on the deterministic approach. If the margin exposure, however, is then of the single chemical larger than 1000, no health concern identified, and then you don't have to do a cumulative risk assessment. But if it's in the middle, between 100 and 1000, you have to perform a probabilistic cumulative risk assessment using MCRA tier 2. Next slide. And then there is also an issue that some cumulative assessment groups in retrospective could come with an outcome that you don't have to do it, or that the CAC is flagged, but that is called the CAC is flagged. So next slide. So we do a cumulative risk assessment in a higher tier if it's between 100 and 1000, and the active success is a priority list and include in the cumulative assessment group, and that the retrospective cumulative risk assessment is available and done, so you can calculate the background. Next slide. So as Angelo also explained, EFSA has done a prioritization exercises to group the pesticides in group and in organs for which a cumulative risk assessment is needed. Then retrospective, these groups are established and they are renewed every 3 years, and that forms the background. And then prospective cumulative risk assessment, a new pesticide crop combination comes into play and has to be added on top of that in as part of the regulatory requirements. And that has to be done by the member states. Next slide. So the hazard for a prospective new pesticides are the same. It needs to have a toxicological point of departure based on the no effect level observed in animal studies, and it needs also to have a relative potency factor. So next slide, then a little bit repetition, but we used occurrence data for the background of the recent 3 years, but that database we exclude samples that are exceeding the maximum residue limit because then a new chemical should not be penalized by things that has to be done by enforcement, so to say. So the concentration data, focal commodity needs to be on top of that as the foreground. So if that combination was in the background, we will remove that, not to double count, and then the foreground depends on residue information that comes from a critical good agricultural practice field trial study that delivers data on how much residue will remain after this practice has been followed. This is what we call the safety of the cap with 20% use frequency, and also some processing factors might come into play. Calculations are done using the whole consumption database, as explained before. Next slide. And the field trial data has to be organized in a certain harmonized template. And this is how it looks like. For example, if you have food item X and chemical I, you need to know the outcome of the residue field trial. And this is just an example. But you also need to understand if that more active substances are linked to a parent compound or to a measured substance. You also need to know how much substance 1 or substance 2 is contributing to that. So these two files needs to be organized and needs to be uploaded to the MCRA software. Next slide. Then uncertainties are also there, like in any scientific calculations, there are uncertainties. So next slide. First of all, the sampling uncertainty. So that's why you have to bootstrap to be sure that you also are not only relying on the way it's observed in a consumption survey, but by bootstrapping, you also draw from the consumption database, create a new one, and then sampling uncertainty is nicely addressed, and it comes with confidence intervals and a very reliable estimate of the median exposure at the P99.9. But there are more uncertainties. Are all the food items covered, for example, and all those uncertainties have been overviewed in the first formal reports on cumulative risk assessment for retrospective assessments. Some uncertainties were well, more relevant than others, and that's how EFSA further developed the methodology and are now writing on the methodology in the cookbook. Next slide. So at this stage, we consider 11 uncertainties as being relevant, and the others might also be relevant, but then comes to an underestimation or overestimation. And 5 to 6 of these uncertainties might be doable in a routine way in the MCRA software, and the other uncertainties might need further explanation by expert knowledge elicitation. This is still work in progress. It's not operational yet, as we said, so this depends a little bit how this exactly will be done based on the cookbook in progress. But overall, you then have an idea about how much you underestimate or overestimate based on these uncertainties. That's called a multiplicative factor, and you can use that as an adjustment on your assessment, either being overestimating or underestimating the risk. So next slide. So if the margin of exposure total is the P99.9 of exposure distribution, and if that's above 200, then such an uncertainty analysis is not necessary according to the endorsed methodology at the moment. If it's below 200, health concern cannot be excluded, so to say, and you have to do an uncertainty analysis because you can underestimate or overestimate the risk. So next slide. For example, a processing factor the field trial studies are done with a focus on apples, raw apples, but then apples are being processed into juice, or apples are being used to bake an apple pie, and then some of the pesticide might disappear completely or partly. We don't know, and sometimes these processing factors are missing, and we have to make the best guess on what is then the impact of underestimating or overestimating based on missing processing factors. So next slide. So then if it's below 200, then this uncertainty should be investigated, so to say. Next slide, next click. And then procedure is now being endorsed in the methodology to go over all the consumption data that we have available in MCRA, and that you look at the potential underestimation or overestimation of the uncertainty due to the uncertainties. So then it comes to decisions if the margin of exposure total needs to be adjusted. Will they all populations be above 100? So no health concern identified. If it's below, then health risk cannot be excluded, and this might then lead that the MRL cannot be accepted. So in conclusions, margin of exposure total is larger for a new MRL dossier than 1,000. There is no risk. Also, there is not a risk if the CLAC is not flagged. Then from retrospective, we already know that this is not of concern. But if it's flagged and if the margin of exposure is between 100 and 1,000, you have to go into a tier 2 assessment based on residue trial data from the good agricultural practice and using 20% frequency, or if needed, another percentage can also be used. So we have done unadjusted margin of exposure total at the P99. If that's larger than 200, you don't have to do the uncertainty analysis. But if it's below, then adjusted uncertainty needs to be done based on the uncertainties that still will be followed in the cookbook, and when they are ready, they can also be implemented in MCRA. And with that, I hand over to Bruno or to Anna Schwarzer.
All right, good morning all. Welcome to the last part of this webinar. This will be a demonstration of the prospective methodology in MCRA. Next slide, please. So first I will talk a bit on how MCRA aligns with the outcomes of the DG Sante EFSA action plan. And this will be followed up by the actual demonstration in MCRA and some foreseen developments. First, I want to start with how it aligns with the DG Sante EFSA action plan. So MCRA was already introduced a couple of times, but it's a platform which is web-based, and it contains data and models to assess exposure and the health effects of single chemicals, but also of chemical mixtures. And at a certain point in time, around 10 years ago, it was recognized that in Europe there was a need for an efficient, transparent, accessible, harmonized and user-friendly software tool that could be used specifically for assessing the health effects for the combined exposure of multiple chemicals. And since that time, EFSA and RIVM have been working together to work on Open MCRA and in the partnerships, and with a special focus on cumulative risk assessment of pesticides. So, as I stated before already, the outcomes of the EFSA DG Sante action plan are also implemented into MCRA. So once something becomes available, like methodology or a new cumulative assessment group, they will be included. The available CACs are included and will be updated over time. Currently, we have 7 available from the 3 target organs that are fully assessed. We also include all the time newest data, both monitoring data and consumption data, and all the other data sets that are needed to perform cumulative risk assessments. The retrospective cumulative risk assessment methodology is implemented and will be updated over time if need to be. And the prospective methodology is partly implemented based on the agreed upon methodology by the European Commission and by EFSA, and this will be worked on in the coming time, also with the cookbook. So next slide, please. So what is available in MCRA? So there are 7 CAGs available, 4 for acute effects and 3 for chronic effects on 3 different organ systems, developmental effects, neurochemical effects, and the thyroids. So you can assess for specific pesticides which have a specific effect using these cumulative assessment groups. What's also available in MCRA, you can see on the next slides, are the concentration and consumption data, which was also shown by Jacob already. We have concentration data from 30 different countries for 36 different commodities. This is gathered by EFSA and harmonized from all the different member states and made available for MCRA. And as the data becomes available, it will be published in MCRA and new 3-year cycles will become available. We also have consumption data from 16 countries for 30 different populations, and we have tested MCRA, and all the data is safe within MCRA, and it's according to the European privacy regulation. So next, the demonstration. So if you click on the link you see on the slide here, then you will come to the opening page of MCRA. It will provide you with information on what MCRA is and what the goal of it is, and provides you also with a few items to click on. For instance, if you're new to MCRA, you can register for an account by clicking on register for an account. If you already have an account, you can log in using the opening screen. So if you log in, you can see some new information that's only available to you if you have registered. The MCRA is divided into 2 parts. One part is based on data. You can upload your own data here, for instance, the field trial data, which we will talk about a bit more in a bit. And the other part is the workspaces. If you click on workspaces, you can create a workspace on your own to have your assessments in. Next slide, please. You can very easily do this by clicking on the green button and just naming your workspace. And a workspace can be used to separate, for instance, dossiers or assessments you want to do for specific chemicals, for instance. Next slide. In this workspace, you can create a standard regulatory action. A standard regulatory action was already explained by Angelo, that it is developed in a harmonized way to make sure that regulators, but also third-party stakeholders in the end, are able to perform agreed upon methodology with an ease of use, and that they also use the same settings to make sure that the outcome of the assessment is the same each time. So you can do this by clicking on the green button, sorry, one slide before, please, on the green button on the right, and then you click on Create Standard Action. The standard action provides you with the harmonized methodology. The other options are more for research purposes we will not go into today. So if you click on Create Standard Regulatory Action, depending on your user group, you will have several options of cumulative risk assessment methodology to choose from. For today, of course, we're focusing on prospective methodology. So you would click on the available methodology, and of course, you use the most recent methodology, but the methodology from previous years is also still available. So if you want to have check what your run would be a couple of years ago, this is also possible. MCRA is open and transparent in that way, so you can always have a look back. So then you would click on this methodology from 2024, and each year there will be updates. After this, you will be asked to give it a name, for instance, your pesticides and your focal substance, focal food commodity of your interest, and you click on Create. This will bring you automatically to the settings page, in which you have to select a couple of things. I think now I can show you that, for instance, this is our just example settings, but I chose for this example the focal food mandarins and focal substance. This is a residue definition of the D-thiocarbamates, including our active substance CRM, which has to be selected using the Excel file, which also includes the field trial data. Then you can click on any effect you want for which a CAG is available and implement it in MCRA. Then you click on the scenario which you want to address. It's automatically set at safety of cap with a 20% use frequency, since this is the scenario agreed upon by the European Commission. Then you can select your consumption data source. In this example, we have selected the Dutch toddlers. Then the monitoring period with the concentration 3-year cycle is already always on the most recent 3-year cycle. If you want, you can select a previous cycle as well. Then you can select your concentration data source and the type of uncertainty analysis. So the uncertainty analysis in this option gives you an idea on the sampling uncertainties, which are explained by Jacob. Other sensitivity analysis for the remaining uncertainties are to be performed in addition to this. After selecting all the settings, you click on Save Changes, and then it's oh, I see that all the options are in here. So if you want to have a look later on, looking back at this is also possible. And if you want to perform your assessment on your own, and you want to include all the uncertainties, then you have to do a full uncertainty analysis with the 100 bootstrap cycles. So then you click on Save Changes. Afterwards, they will be asked to upload your field trial data and the deterministic substance conversion factors. To help you out, if you have already preset the settings and clicked on Save Changes, and afterwards you download the template by clicking on Download Data Template. A part of the data template is already pre-filled for you. It contains already the food items code and the substance item code, and you only have to fill in your data from the field trial data. So next slide. This is what the template would look like. I download the template, and then the substance and the food I removed and put in green here. This is already pre-filled already, depending on your choice in the settings. So the only thing you have to do is in the red box on the right is to fill in the field trial data you have from your trials. And if the value is above the LOQ, you just put in a value. If the value is below the LOQ, you just leave the value empty, and the residue type you fill in LOQ. Next slide. In the next tab of the Excel file, you will have all the chemicals, all the active substances that are a part of the residue definition which you selected in MCRA. It could be that if you only selected the substance for which the residue definition has only one compound, there's only one in here. But if you have selected a residue definition which includes multiple substances, you will have all the substances and their conversion factors in your Excel file. And what you then have to do is remove all the substances that you do not want to perform the assessment for. So you select only one active substance. And these deterministic conversion factors are used to calculate from the measured substance to the active substance. So then you upload this Excel file, and it will be automatically linked to your settings. And if you then run the action by clicking on the play button in the gray banner, MCRA will do the work for you, so to say. In the meantime, in waiting for your run, you can change the name and, for instance, add what type of assessments you're doing, what type of population you have chosen, and what type of field trial chemical, for instance, you're interested in. You click on OK and wait for the results to be finished. So if your results are finished, you can just click on the name of the output, and it will bring you to the results pages. The results pages are set up with two parts. One part is on the results, where you can find the results of your prospective cumulative risk assessment, and one part is on the settings. Next slide, please. The settings provide you all the settings you have selected and also the ones that are already preset in MCRA. It also shows you all the different data types and data versions that have been used in your calculations, so it's easy to backtrack. Next slide. So this is an example of a result that could be obtained for a prospective cumulative risk assessment. However, this is done using fake data that was exaggerated to show you an effect. So this is not a real assessment using real field trial data. This is a demo using fake data. But what you could, for instance, see in the table on the left is that at this different percentiles of the exposure distribution, and specifically at the 99.9, which is the threshold of regulatory consideration, the MOET, which is also shown by MCRA as the hazard, the risk characterization ratio, is below 100, meaning that there is a health effect could not be excluded. On the right side, there is a pie chart, and it provides you with an idea of which chemicals provide most to the total risk. In this case, since we exaggerated on the field trial data, you see that 99.3% of the total risk is due to the focal food X in a focal substance Y. If you have field trial data which has more moderate values, then it would show you an overview of all the food and substance combination that have contributed to the total risk. Next slide, please. So based on this fictive example, you could make the following conclusions. This is an unadjusted MOET for the P99.9 of the exposure distribution, looking just at one population, but the MOET is below 100. If you just recall the slides presented by Jacob, if you have such a value for one population below 200, it says that an uncertainty analysis should be performed. So I'm going to show you how you can do this based on what we currently have in MCRA. Next slide, please. So what you can do is just change one of the settings, which is add a sensitivity analysis scenario. For now, only one is available in MCRA, which is for the uncertainty of the missing processing factors. Then you can select this, save changes, and run your action again. So what this sensitivity analysis does, it provides you with the best case scenario. As Jacob explained, if missing processing factors, so processing factors are needed to convert concentrations from raw commodities to processed commodities. If these factors are missing, in the nominal run, so in original run, a worst case is assumed that 100% is transferred from the raw commodity to a processed commodity. So this is basically a worst case scenario. So what the sensitivity analysis does is looking at the best case scenario. So you would say the truth is somewhere in the middle. So it then assumes that if a processing factor is missing, none of the residue is transferred to the processed food. So what you can see here, that going from an MOET at the 99.9 percentile of the exposure distribution of 26, it moves up to 821. So this is the best case and the worst case comparison. And from these two values, it's then possible to calculate a multiplicative factor specifically for this uncertainty. Also shown by Jacob, there are 11 uncertainties, and the multiplicative factors of these uncertainties will have to be calculated together to one multiplicative factor. Next slide. So again, based on this example data, what you could say is that for the adjusted MOET at the 99.9 percentile of exposure, which is adjusted with a multiplicative factor, and the MOET goes to up over 100 for all populations that no health concern is identified. However, this is of course an example calculation but no health concern is identified in this example. But we're only looking at one population and we are only included one uncertainty. So this is what we can do for now. We are looking forward to the EFSA's cookbook so we can implement other uncertainty analysis as well. Next slide. So the focus of the Open MCRA partnership with EFSA and RIVM is on regulators to perform cumulative risk assessments in their own countries, but also at European level, so as the European Commission and EFSA. So we train the food safety authorities and the competent authorities on the use of MCRA so they can use this in their daily work. We train these online trainings, but we also have a self-paced training in the EU Academy available. And last year we trained over 130 participants from 22 countries, making sure that they will be able to perform these assessments in their daily job. Next slide. I think this is my last slide. Yes, so concluding remarks. The methodology is nearby regulatory acceptance, and EFSA is now developing a cookbook specifically for prospective cumulative risk assessment. And EFSA and RIVM are working together to support this, the implementation of it in MCRA. And we are training the regulators, and they will also have follow-up training on prospective methodology and on retrospective methodology, so they can be used in their daily work. And in the next year, also training for third-year stakeholders is foreseen. So that might be you. I think this is my last slide, so I can give the floor back to Bruno.
Thank you very much, Jacob and Anna. In fact, thank you to all three speakers for these excellent presentations. I think this were very clear, and I hope that our audience will feel the same way. And with this, I think we actually can move towards the Q&A session. So we noticed that some questions have already been submitted and published. So my proposal is to now start going through some of the questions submitted. And as mentioned before, we will start with the most liked questions. Currently, there are no particular preferences. So I will start with the first one that was submitted. So it was asked whether, and I think this refers to the prioritization method that was presented by Angelo. So at some point we stated a hazard index exceeding 1 for 60 organs, or whether the question is whether this was actually for individual organs. Just to clarify that the prioritization method was applied to 16 different organs separately. We assessed each organ separately, and for those organs that where the hazard index exceeded 1, those 7 organs have been prioritized. We are here talking again about the thyroid and the nervous system that were already prioritized in the past without the prioritization method. And on top of that, we have prioritized the liver, the kidney, the developmental effects, the hematopoietic system toxicity, and the last one is now escaping my attention, but basically we have prioritized those 7 organs. When we are asking about the immune system that can affect different organs, I just want to clarify that this has been considered in those 16 organs that we assessed, because among those 16 organs, we covered, for example, the thyroid, the marrow bone, etc., or the bone marrow, sorry. So I think with this, we have addressed this first question. Then I would like to move to the next question I see in line. There is the question whether the code of MCRA is available. So with this, I will give the floor to Angelo.
Yeah, thank you, Bruno. Thanks for this question. So we need to make a distinction. So the web interface of MCRA as such, as a user interface, is not being published as code. There will be maybe an idea in the long term, but that is only the user interface. Whereas, as also mentioned in some of the slides, the core models that are behind the user interface and they run the calculations, those are publicly available on a Git repository that is publicly accessible. And those ones are then available for usage and also in agreement also with RIVM colleagues for extension, for instance, for custom usage. And I think this is, I think it replies the question. So back to you, the floor, Bruno.
Thank you, Angelo. So this will then allow us to move to the next question, where somebody asked whether we could clarify the circumstances when a CAG should be flagged for prospective CRA. So for this question, I will give the floor to Luc Moimont.
Thank you, Bruno. Yes, so a CAG is flagged. A CAG is flagged when the retrospective cumulative risk assessment with this CAG shows a risk cap almost full. That means that for such CAGs, the addition of a new contributor may make this risk cap exceeded. So in order to identify those CAGs, it is foreseen during the retrospective cumulative risk assessment to make a sensitivity analysis in which the calculations would be repeated, but without non-compliant samples. So this is exactly how the background exposure will be considered in a prospective cumulative risk assessment. So if in this sensitivity analysis we find MOET below 150, this CAG will be flagged as a CAG of possible concerns. That means a prospective cumulative risk assessment will be made concerning this CAG. We will go directly to tier 2.
Thank you very much, Luc, for this response. Yes, so very clear response. I will then look for the next live question. So will the prospective MRL scenario allow for a group of commodities to be considered, for example, citrus? This question, I will also pass the floor to Luc again.
Yes, so supposing that we have an application for the group of commodity citrus. The camera. Yes, so supposing that we have such application which cover multiple commodities, so we would consider whether a prospective cumulative risk assessment is necessary for each of the commodity of the group separately. For instance, we will make a decision whether prospective CRA is needed for oranges, and we would have the same question for mandarins. So if the answer is yes for these two questions, for these two commodities, we make a prospective cumulative risk assessment separately for mandarins and oranges. I give you the floor back to you, Bruno.
Thank you, Luc. So again, clearly replied. So I will now move to another question from Daphne de Rode. How can you conclude that the risk is absent if the worst case margin of exposure indicates there is a risk and the refined best case margin of exposure indicates not? How can you tell which MOE is closest to reality? For this question, I think I will give the floor to our colleague from RIVM, Marloes. can you maybe address this question?
Yes. Yeah. Thank you for the question. I think you referred to try doing a sensitivity analysis to address a certain uncertainty. And by doing such a sensitivity analysis, you always end up with a best case and a worst case scenario. And well, the truth is somewhere in the middle, but there are many more uncertainties which you try to address. And in the end, you combine all these different uncertainties. And so you have the 11 different multiplicative factors, and these will be combined into one multiplicative factor with which you adjust your margin of exposure total. I hope this answers your question, and I give the floor back to Bruno.
Yes, thank you very much, Marloes. I think it fully clarifies the question, and I think it's really highlighting the fact that this uncertainty analysis is not always easy to give a very straightforward reply. It's really about assessing the different lines of evidence, and from there, from let's say expert point of view, try to identify the most realistic scenario. But these type of let's say indications will also be further developed in the cookbook. Now, the next question that I see is probably a question for Luc Moimont. So what kind of residual field trials data is required? Is it zone specific or data from any zone can be entered? Is there any minimum or maximum number of trials that can be used for prospective CRA? Luc, I give you the floor.
Yes, Bruno, thank you. Actually, we found exactly the same rules as for the normal MRL setting apply here. So there are a certain number of trials required to justify an MRL, 8 for a major crop or for a minor crop. Eventually, trials from different zones, north and south, can be combined if this is justified. But when we will do prospective cumulative risk assessment, we will use exactly the same trials as those that have been used to define the MRL. So if we have, for instance, combined data from the north and for the south to derive the MRL, we might have 16 trials, let's say, and we would also use these 16 trials to perform the prospective cumulative risk assessment process. So we will really align on the trials that have been used for setting the MRL. You can take the floor back, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Luc. So again, one question addressed, but I see we have some additional questions coming in the meantime. I see here one question that might be addressed by our colleague Jacob van Klaveren. So if pesticide notifiers will use MCRA in the future, how many assessments per company per year are foreseen to be supported? This is not yet fully clear, but at least I think, Jacob, you could give an answer to this.
Yes, thank you for the question, and indeed that comes also with the methodology and the number of cumulative assessment groups at the end of the day. But anyhow, the idea is to support all of them, providing there is sufficient computer capacity in the future. So as you see from the uncertainty analysis that needs to be done and the number of countries that needs to be done, it could be very heavy and computer capacity demanding processes. So, and we are still in the development phase and not in the operational phase, which starts in 2026. But the idea is to support them all. If I understood from the regulatory process, the number of MRL applications that could come in, that will not be extremely large, but doable given the computer capacity that we might need. But still, we need to develop how many jobs can be done simultaneously, and the computer capacity is needed for that, as well as the cost that might come with all these calculations. But that's the operational phase, and we will explore that further in the cooperation with EFSA.
Thank you very much, Jakob. Clearly addressed, I think. So, I mean, at least clearly indicated that this is still to be further clarified how to be addressed, but it is definitely a topic that is on our radar and that we will address further in the future. I see here another question that might be addressed, I think, by Luc Moimont again. So it was indicated that a default use frequency of 20% should be used unless specific data are available. What type of data are foreseen in this case?
Yes, thank you, Bruno. It might be that some substances are more frequently used than other substances. And we could find indication about this either indirectly through the monitoring data that we receive from all member states in the context of the preparation of the annual monitoring report on pesticide residues. So if for a pesticide monitoring data indicate that this pesticide is maybe used at a frequency higher than 20% on some crops. Also, for new applications concerning new commodities, it might be that the use frequency would be higher also than 20%. And in that case, it would be the task of the risk assessor to decide whether or not a use frequency higher than 20% would be reasonable to use to perform the prospective cumulative risk assessment. But the tool that we have to make this decision will be based on the monitoring data for these pesticides on other commodities, of course. I give you the floor back to you.
Thank you very much, Luc, but I'm sorry, I think I will have to get back to you again because I see here a question also where I think your input might be very much appreciated. So will there be a public consultation on the EFSA cookbook? And whilst the process may be established, commenting might help with clarity gray areas. Luc, do you want to address this question?
Yes, Bruno, I can make a try at least. Actually, it is not decided yet if there will be a public consultation on the EFSA cookbook, but we will shortly have a meeting with the risk managers under the umbrella of the cumulative assessment group of Santé, and we will discuss on the implementation process of prospective cumulative risk assessment. The cookbook will be also discussed during these meetings, and I'm sure that the opportunity of organizing some type of consultations on this cookbook or on the process, on the overall process itself will be also discussed. So it might be that there will be public consultations, but this, I think, will be decided with the risk managers later on in the process. And you must also know that this cookbook will be a living document. So it will be published first. It will be applied, but with experience, we will identify points on which it can be improved. It will also follow the evolutions of the MCRA software. So this will be really a living document which will be over years updated regularly. But for the point of the public consultation, this will be discussed in the next few weeks, I guess, with the risk managers. Okay, I'm giving back the floor to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Luc. So I will now move to a next question, which refers again to the use of residue trials, but I think I will take that question myself. So the question is, are we using HR in the acute risk assessment when we upload the template in case of acute assessment, or also median residues? I think it's important to mention that in the case of when using residue trials, especially for the acute exposure assessments, we are applying a full Monte Carlo simulation. So that means that we use the full set of residue trials data available, and that these trials data are being randomly assigned to consumption events, also considering this use frequency of 20%. In the case of chronic risk assessment, the average concentration is used, but also in that case adjusted for this use frequency of 20%. So this is how, so we are not really using this HR value like we do in deterministic assessment, but since this is a probabilistic approach, we are using that across all residue trials. I'm now looking for another question that I think again might need to be referred to Luc. So will notifiers have to perform uncertainty analysis using the expert knowledge elicitation methodology? Luc, I give you the floor.
Thank you, Bruno. It is true that in the past we have addressed the uncertainties with the EKI methodology, but this is a methodology which is quite resource demanding, and in the future we intend to perform the uncertainty analysis in a simpler way, so not making use of the EKI methodology, but just by a normal expert judgment. So I think that the uncertainty analysis process will follow the same steps, but without requiring the intervention of multiple assessors. It will be performed by simple expert judgment by individuals. So the requirement of EKI will not exist anymore for the future cumulative risk assessment, being retrospective or prospective. So an uncertainty analysis will continue to be essential, but in a simple way. I give you the floor back to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Luc. This is one more question addressed. I'm going through the list of questions to see a little bit what is still in there. I see here one question that I think might be addressed by Angelo. So the question is my understanding correct that as the tool is not yet in operational phase, it cannot be currently used by third-party stakeholders? Angelo, I give you the floor.
Yeah, thanks for this question. And it is so true that now we are in the development phase, as well understood. So we are still refining the methodologies and understanding what is the versions of the standard actions that are available that will be concretized basically for the future according to the methodological discussions. When we move to the operational phase, we are starting to envisage diversity of groups what we defined as regulatory users, those that will be by definition the users that will use the actions to perform on a daily basis assessments. We also foresee research users that are those that might contribute also to the further developments of the provided standard actions. And we have envisaged a group that it's for third-party stakeholders, where we start to also analyze possible usages from this group, but taking into account the resources that are needed to run the calculations. So we need to create a sustainable model for that. And it might be that for specific usages or when a consistent amount of resources is needed, there may be a fee system that will be applied. So this will be, of course, published in the external scientific reports that we are producing, and also later on in the operational phase. That will not mean that we will put ourselves on the backstage and work in maintenance mode, but we will continue to deliver trainings, open webinars, and also we will publish around this work to keep everybody updated. Thanks for addressing this question, and I give back the floor to Bruno.
Thank you very much, Angelo. I see that we still have some questions that came in the meantime. So the next one that I find on the list, I think would be a good question for Anne. So the question is, will MCRA run tier 2 for multiple populations, or do they have to be done individually? I know this is a topic that is on the radar. So yes, please, Anne, I give you the floor.
All right, thank you for this question. So currently we're working on a way for MCRA to actually do this. We're working on the looping to make it available for regulators or for third-party stakeholders in the end to include all the populations at once, but currently this is not yet possible. So I hope in the coming year we will get close to the solution. I give the floor back to you, Bruno.
Thank you very much, Anne. And I think we are really getting close to the end of the list of questions. I see still one question from Dave Parker from Syngenta. And I think this question might be addressed by Jakob. So whilst there may not be many CRA-related applications into EFSA member states, notifiers foresee needing to do many more scoping exercises than the number of applications, as happened now with Primo, in order to find supportable uses in fewer eventual assessments. Do EFSA RIVM envisage supporting all notifiers scoping in the operational phase? I would give now the floor to Jakob, and if needed, I can also further clarify on that response. So Jakob, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for the question, and thank you, Bruno. So indeed, there could be more interest also for the scoping of new pesticides before it becomes an application. And I think this is perfectly fine also to use MCRA for that reason. And it comes back again to the computer capacity, how many of the scoping events would occur, and how to arrange that if that has to be done in parallel computing. But these are technical things that have technical solutions as well, and it might also come with how often that is going to happen. But in principle, yes, that could be supported.
Thank you very much, Jakob. So yes, I think that with this we have addressed all the questions that came in. I might still. Oh, do we still have a question coming in? I'm giving still this opportunity to check these final questions to our moderators. So let's see if there is an additional question coming in. Yes, I think so. So let me try and find that question now. Oh, I see it got here. Okay, is the SAS code is that one? Is the SAS code behind MCRA available? I think that there I will give the floor again to Angelo Caffaro. So please, Angelo.
Yeah, so just to clarify that it's not SAS code, and the code of the core models, this has been also covered in a previous question. It's available on the public repositories, and when we will produce the offline reply to questions, we may add specific links to the Git repositories where this can be found. Thank you, Bruno, and thanks for this final question.
Thank you very much, Angelo. And I think that with this, we have gone through all the questions that were posed. So unless there are any other questions still coming in, I think even if we are a little bit ahead of time, I think it was quite a full webinar. I think there was quite a lot of information that was shared through this webinar. And I think also based on the questions we've received, we also see that there is quite some interest in the topic. And therefore, yeah, I think it's good to see that there is a bit of engagement there. And clearly, our intention is in the future to continue, let's say, updating our community on the progress that we are making in this area, as we will proceed gradually with the implementation of this new methodology. So as I mentioned before, I mean, at the onset of the webinar, the recording and the presentations will be made available on EFSA's website in the coming days. We would be very grateful if you could take a few minutes to complete the satisfaction survey that you will receive by emails. And finally, questions that were unanswered, but I don't think we had any left, will be made available on the website. So that may be also the case. And with this, again, I would like to thank all attendees for attending this webinar. I hope you found this webinar informative. And I also would like to thank all the people in the back, or the people that were on screen, let's say, presenting in the first place, but also the people in the back doing the moderation, and of course also the colleagues internally helping us with the organization, the slides, etc. So I think with this we can close the webinar, and we hope to have other updates in the future. Thank you all.